Today we're going to talk about depression and is tryptophan metabolism at the core of the issue. I'm Dr. Martin Rutherford. I am a certified functional medicine practitioner. I am a chiropractor since 1979.
Dr. Randall Gates, board certified chiropractic neurologist, also a chiropractor.
And we have a chronic pain practice. And the chronic pain practice is addressed by combining the two disciplines of functional medicine and functional neurology. I was just talking with one of our office members this morning who does our online work here, who is producer of this program, Kevin, and we were talking about some of the things that make us different. And one of the things that makes us different is we have put two different disciplines together in order to create a whole to address all of the moving parts, all of the different vicious cycles and biochemical pathways of chronic pain. And there are certain things that are kind of the cornerstones of the general alternative practitioner's practice. And one of them is the fact that stress and depression seem to be understood as contributing to different types of chronic situations. But a lot of different people have a lot of different ways of addressing that. And so one of the things that we've been able to accomplish is to address the neurological aspects at the same time as we address the functional medicine aspects. And one of the and where I'm going with that is that in many alternative practices, there are certain approaches to certain things that are kind of, and I'm going to use the term simplistic. I don't mean to sound that way. Maybe silver bullet-y, like you have stress, you have depression, so I can give you this. In the medical field, it would be, I would give you an antidepressant, okay? In the alternative field, it might be tryptophan. It might be 5-HTP or something like that. And I think what we've come to find out is that is maybe that's not the best approach. Either sometimes it's okay in the short term, but not even in the short term, and certainly in the long term. That may not be the best approach to deal with depression. Now, we deal with chronic pain, but virtually everybody who walks in this office. It is rare that somebody comes into our office and we have a check sheet before that person starts, and it's rare that they don't put depression down, okay, as part of their clinical picture when they come in. And frankly, it's kind of unusual for them to leave depressed once they've gotten through the program.
Right.
Technically, we're kind of sort of not treating depression. Technically, we're treating the mechanisms that are creating their chronic pain, and then in that framework, their depression, for the most part, with some exceptions, with some extremely severe cases, okay, usually is addressed. So we're gonna talk about depression in general, but we're also going to talk about, we get a lot of people who come in here and they've been using tryptophan, they've been using 5-HTP, and they've been using melatonin to go to sleep and these types of things. And so we're going to talk about that. And we've talked a lot about depression already.
We have in other broadcasts.
In other broadcasts. So why don't you first start out by doing an overview of both today, what we're going to talk about today more, a little bit more of an overview, more specifics, and maybe even bring folks up to speed as to some of the bits and pieces of some of our previous broadcasts that would be pertinent to today's discussion.
Absolutely. Relative to depression, many people with depression have an understanding that they have a chemical imbalance. And so that is why they need to take medications such as Prozac or, Lexapro, and these different SSRIs, SNRIs. SSRI stands for serotonin specific reuptake inhibitor. Basically, these are just medications that keep good neurotransmitters, quote unquote, in between this brain cell and this brain cell in your brain, so that these brain cells can talk more and so that you have more kind of brain activation and you feel more positive. So that's the general premise of taking an antidepressant. Some of them deal with serotonin, some of them deal with combinations of serotonin and another neurotransmitter called norepinephrine, while others deal solely with dopamine, like Wellbutrin. Now, with that being said, our model for depression was exactly that. We just thought, okay, you're taking these antidepressants because for some reason you're low on serotonin or norepinephrine or dopamine, and therefore this medication is going to help you to have normal quantities of these neurochemicals in your brain. Then the findings started coming out that it may not be exactly that way. So what we see with antidepressants is that it can take up to 2 weeks for them to work. But what we know is that when you take a chemical like Prozac, that it's going to immediately increase serotonin in your brain. So the question became, why does it take 2 weeks for it to work when we know that the chemicals are there? Is it just a building up process? Do we just have to get so much chemical in between this brain cell and this brain cell? And for a long time with these antidepressants, drug companies would even say, this is how the medication works, but we're not really even sure why it works. Now, the why has recently come out, in my opinion, in the last few years, and there's a great chapter on it in the Principles of Neuroscience for all the doctors who like to watch this. And in that chapter, they detail how really what's changing with antidepressants is that the memory area of the brain is building new brain cells when we take antidepressants. So that shifted the model. And so we have to take a step back. What we see with depression is that the fear center in the brain becomes overactivated. The fear center in the brain is called the amygdala. It triggers your fight-flight responses that we talk about every week. And so that amygdala seems to be primed in depressed patients. And what they've shown is that the amygdala, the fear center, doesn't shut off. So you can inject a hormone like cortisol into the body, which should shut off the amygdala because it then sees there's lots of cortisol, so it doesn't have to fire. And in depressed patients, oftentimes, it just keeps firing the signals down to the adrenal glands to make more and more cortisol. Now, the amygdala, the fear center, is right next to the memory area. The memory area is called the hippocampus. So they're kind of like a ham sandwich from a neuroscience perspective. They're right next to each other. What we see in depression is that the hippocampus, which is one of two areas in your brain that makes new brain cells all the time. One is your olfactory bulb, the other is your hippocampus. So it's building new brain cells. And when we're in this depressed state, the amygdala, the fear center, can actually start to overtake the hippocampus. And the hippocampus starts not making as many brain cells at the same pace, so to speak. And some of the new brain cells, they're not forming at the right rate. So in essence, the amygdala wins the tug of war and it starts to take over the hippocampus. Okay, hopefully you're all with me. Tried to make that as understandable as possible. Now, one of the key factors that's been associated with the hippocampus and the brain cells there starting to die and degenerate was cortisol. So I talked about how the amygdala, the fear center, it sends signals from your brain down to your adrenal glands, which sit on top of your kidney, to make high levels of cortisol that then come back up to the brain and actually will have a negative effect on hippocampal brain cell growth. With me?
I'm with you.
Okay, good. Good.
I'm just trying to get a visual in case maybe I need to.
Okay, perfect. Making sure. And so with this, and the reason why we say that is because we want you to understand this. It makes no sense for us to talk about things if it's just above your head and it's not pertaining to kind of your viewpoint on what's going on with your brain. But I can kind of summarize this again once we get to the end of it. So then the fear center, again, is causing lots of cortisol to be produced, and that causes your memory area to start to die and degenerate. And what we now see with antidepressants is that the key factor they have is that they start to build new brain cells in your memory area, which gives your brain the chance to start taking over the fear area again and shutting it off. So that's the new paradigm in depression. Yes, the good neurochemicals are there. Yes, the good neurochemicals do help to fire your frontal lobes, which are associated with positive emotions. That is true. But this whole war between the amygdala and the hippocampus is kind of at the core of this issue that we're talking about. And so from there, we can begin to understand everything else that tends to screw up your hippocampus. And when we did our depression broadcast, I think it was in late December, maybe it was early January of this year, we talked extensively about other systemic factors associated with depression from hormones, like if you're a female and you have low estrogen, or you're a guy and you have low testosterone, those can be associated. Again, high levels of cortisol, not good. Inflammation can be very hard on the brain. So lots of times people, when they have lots of inflammation, they can have associations with depression. Autoimmune disease is exactly the same, including factors such as Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is where the immune system kills the thyroid. And what they see is that the immune cells to the thyroid actually decrease blood flow to the frontal lobes, and that's associated with depression. So there are a number of factors that have to be assessed, including gut bacteria. Believe it or not, we did a whole talk on the gut bacteria and the relationship to the brain, because we're finding that some people's gut bacteria are different from other people's. And for depressed subjects, their gut bacteria think the bacterial poop, so to speak, the bacterial byproducts actually go into the brain and can actually negatively affect how our brain is thinking and how we process emotions. And then also obesity is another one. So we find that those who have obesity, the fat cells release toxins, if you want to think of them that way. They release inflammatory chemicals that also can negatively affect the brain. So the reason why this is such a hot topic is because the antidepressants can work for sure, but a lot of people have recurrent depression, or they may be on antidepressants and maybe they have to take another antidepressant. And you may know some of these people, or you may be one of these people. And we're not telling you not to follow your doctor's advice. Follow your doctor's advice, but we're giving you this information to kind of add to your kind of clinical acumen or your lay acumen on what is going on with depression. And so with this inflammatory model, what we're seeing is that the inflammation in the brain is affecting how good neurotransmitters like serotonin are produced, and other neurotransmitters are being produced that help to stabilize your brain, your memory area of the brain called the hippocampus. So that's kind of the general overview of what we talked about in previous broadcasts and what we're going to go into today.
Yeah, blood sugar.
Blood sugar is another one. I missed that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so basically we're talking about, what the summary is there's chemicals that can, there's chemicals that it can affect your brain in such a way that you get depression. That's like the simple part of it. And the reason I say that is because Dr. Gates did make a statement that a lot of people know that depression is chemical imbalance, but I would say that most people come in here don't.
Okay.
And most people who come in here think it's a personality disorder. And they don't really understand what you just got done going through, which would be good for you to understand. The best thing for you to understand would be it is a chemical imbalance for the most part, and that it is affecting these two structures, your fear mechanism, which is part of your emotional system, we discussed before we got on here, and the hippocampus, which is your memory, your circadian rhythm. It affects those two particular parts. And so where we're going with that is that the tryptophan is it's supposed to be the answer to what's going on there. And we're going to make the argument that the things that you were just talking about relative to gut function and these types of things is going to be a better long-term way to go about this.
Right.
And one other thing, the amygdala. Okay, so the amygdala is the fear center of your brain. Okay, and so this has to get set off to set off the fight-flight mechanism that starts putting out all these stress chemicals that Dr. Gates talks about. And most of our patients that come in here are in some sort of fight-flight, or frankly, some sort of mini to maxi to medium post-traumatic stress syndrome. And I think it might be good for them to know, because to me, when I talk to the patients, they kind of get when I say, you're trying to take 5-HTP and you're trying to take tryptophan. And sometimes I'll say it's like kind of like peeing on a forest fire, because this vicious cycle keeps going. And what you're going to talk about is going to be more likely to break this vicious cycle than even a drug or even a supplement or something like that. Because what keeps that vicious cycle going? What is it that fires up that amygdala in patients that get chronic pain most of the time? Isn't it like trauma? Isn't it like verbal, physical, sexual
That can be a
abuse?
major player for sure.
Isn't it like being alcoholic parents? I had a patient, well, I can't share. I shouldn't share just in case.
Right.
But I mean, I've heard some pretty bizarre stuff, in doing these consults. So
Absolutely. So childhood trauma is huge in all of this. And hopefully you're understanding, we need to make the point that you are being conditioned. You're being marketed to all the time. You're being marketed to take this for this, take that for that. And the reason why I said many of you have the understanding that depression is a chemical imbalance, I'm saying that with the context that you watch pharmaceutical commercials in the evening news, and they're telling you that depression is a chemical imbalance. And then, somebody's taking a new medication, next thing they're running through the meadow really happily. We're not saying that doesn't happen, but just understand, again, you're being sold to all the time. And so if you're an alternatively minded person, you're going to go to alternatively minded practitioners who frequently will say, okay, well, you're depressed, you need to take tryptophan.
Because that's what they've been taught.
Yeah. Well, that's partially true. So tryptophan turns into serotonin. And that's very true. Tryptophan turns into serotonin. What we're going to go into today is that this issue is far more complicated. And that's why...
But serotonin can be damaged by a lot of things we just got done talking about.
Absolutely.
That's the point.
I mean, we didn't even mention that this is 2012, this came out, half of depressed subjects have antibodies to serotonin. So their immune system is killing serotonin. Hardly anybody's talking about it. But in the field of psychiatry, there's a lot of discussion about this because they realize that while antidepressants work, and while the pharmaceutical industry continues to develop more powerful antidepressants, some that have some borderline antipsychotic properties that can help people, they realize that all these factors that we're outlining here in today's broadcast are the major players for depression. And they're trying to create new pharmaceuticals, new drugs to target what we're talking about, which we're not saying is bad, but we're trying to give you an overall picture because most people watching this, we're not telling you not to be on your drugs in no way, shape, or form, but most people watching these broadcasts, maybe they don't want to be on their medications. Maybe they want to work with their doctor to get off their medications, but they don't know how. And when they try to go off their medications, they fail because all this other stuff we're talking about is still at play. So let's get into that.
So there's a different and a better way. I would say a better way. I mean, most people get that the less chemicals you put in your body, the better. And these chemicals...
I would say a better way when you're supervised. I'm very cautious with this topic.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's a better way when you're supervised.
I do.
Yeah. Sorry for interrupting. Keep going.
No, that's good. That's good.
And so maybe if you're watching this, today is a little more detailed. And sometimes I just don't know how to break away from the detail because there are things here that I think some of our patients like to understand. So if you want to kind of be engaged in today's broadcast, maybe pause the video now, get a piece of paper and a pen. And then come back. So now you're back. And so here you have your piece of paper and draw a brain, which just do your best job to draw a brain. And then underneath that brain, you can write, especially under the front part of the brain, which is your frontal lobes, which is what we're talking about today, you can write hormones, you can write gut bacteria, you can write cortisol, you can write the immune system, or write obesity, write insulin. You can even write anxiety, which ties in with the cortisol, but we'll make it all one and the same. So all these factors on your frontal lobe are things that potentially are screwing up your frontal lobe, not allowing it to work correctly. And that's kind of the summary of everything we're talking about here. Now we get into tryptophan. So the general overview on tryptophan is that tryptophan does turn into serotonin, which is a good neurotransmitter. What we're finding is that many depressed patients have a lot of inflammation. We attached 25 articles to today's broadcast. You can find them on powerhealthtalk.com. So go off YouTube, go to powerhealthtalk.com, search depression. You'll see today's broadcast. The articles are listed underneath. And in those articles, it's thoroughly discussed how inflamed most depressed patients are. When depressed patients are exposed to inflammation, they start to process tryptophan abnormally. So they start to take their tryptophan and they start to turn it into other inflammatory toxic chemicals rather than turning it into serotonin. Now, originally, when this was discovered, the researchers were saying, aha, eureka, we found it, because now we know why serotonin is low in the brain, and that's the main problem here. Turns out it's not the main problem. What is the main problem is that these toxic metabolites from the inflammation causing tryptophan to be converted into these toxic compounds, they're the problem. And in essence, they're overexciting. These toxic chemicals are overexciting brain cells, especially in your memory area, causing those memory cells to die and degenerate. And as a result, then the fear center is able to go uninhibited at 9,000 RPMs. And that's one of the key factors keeping this whole process going.
And doesn't it actually grow, that fear
Yeah,
center?
the fear center can actually start to overtake.
So now it's more
neuronal
continually
territory.
Stimulated
Right,
on its own.
right.
For those of you who
Hippocampus.
don't feel like, why is my brain going a million miles an hour all the time and nothing I can do can calm it down? This is probably occurring.
Absolutely, yeah. We have patients saying that all the time. People tell me to meditate. I can't shut off my mind. I don't know what to do. Yeah.
Or I don't feel like I'm a stressed person, but I'm stressed all the time.
Right.
I've heard a lot of people say that. This is what's happening.
Or if you ask them in greater detail, you say, well, what are you thinking about most of the time? I'm thinking about this. I'm thinking about that. I'm thinking about this. Well, they're stressed. And it's not them. It's not that they're weak. It's not that they're odd. Frankly, this is becoming the more common pattern, if anything.
Well, at least in our patient population.
Yeah. And
which includes
so
160 million chronic pain patients out there.
Which is why we talk about depression so often, because now in our practice, we see primarily patients who have autoimmune disease, and throughout the literature, they're now discussing how all these autoimmune patients, they have characteristics of depression. If they don't have major depressive disorder, they have periods of significant depression. And it's because their immune system is doing all this. So for those of you who want a little more detail, should we go into more detail? You probably say no.
This is your call. I'm kind of leaving this one to you. I'm just trying to like maybe bring it into focus in general for certain populations that might be watching this.
Yeah, it's always tough because we have some people who want.
We have a wide
details.
group of people who watch this. We actually have professors that watch and call us, and we've had some pretty interesting patients show up here from big medical facilities. But frankly, the vast majority of our patients are the average lay person who has been to a lot of different places and hasn't really gotten help in this. And when I started to talk in the beginning about what kind of makes us different in a sense, I don't want to sound like a sales pitch there or something like that. So that wasn't the right way to say it. But the thing that we see when people come here and they have a lot of chronic pain issues and they've gone to a lot of alternative practitioners, and we're not banging alternative practitioners, they are our brethren, okay? But the reality is that this stress mechanism that Dr. Gates is talking about is sophisticated. It is like your brain has its pedal to the metal. And it's like the parts of the brain that are supposed to shut it down cannot do it. And these chemical pathways are a big part of the reason, okay? And so when that's happening, it's flooding your entire system with all kinds of stress hormones, not just cortisol, but it's with adrenaline and noradrenaline and glucocorticoids. And you don't even know what all that is, but some of them mess up your blood sugar. Others damage your nerve endings. I mean, all this stuff is happening. That's why you see somebody who is stressed all the time starts to not look so good. You know, it's literally wearing and tearing down their entire system. And then when patients come here, they'll tell me, well, I tried tryptophan and I tried HTP. And that's why I said, you know, Dr. Gates is going to say, well, that's good if you don't have high or low blood sugar, if you don't have gut problems, if you don't have stress hormones that are sabotaging their own mechanisms, that, and if you have strong frontal lobes, if you haven't had a concussion. I mean, all these things create the inflammation that he's talking about. So now that's kind of what we're talking about. So the argument's going to be, you know, tryptophan is okay. The drugs are okay. Look, your body's made to work on its own. Why, you know, it's the old, why does your body heal of a cut and it can't heal of something else? It's because there's something in the way that's stopping it. In this particular case, it's not only that these chemicals are causing your depression, but they're in the way of stopping most of the other things that you have. That's why you have to take them for the rest of your life. If you don't come across a better way, which the literature is out there pointing the arrows to, but we're not anti-medicine, but because our healthcare model is what it is, that research is largely going to result in producing more drugs for this. That's, in my opinion, is not the best way, simply because every drug that you put in your system is going to alter multiple pathways. It's impossible for it not to. We don't even know all the things that are happening in our gut or in our brain or in our system. This is a new discovery. How many more new discoveries is there going to be this year? Lots.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
So Dr. Gates, so the pathways that Dr. Gates is talking about are going to be relative to the things that he's talking about that we think are a better way. So gut.
Absolutely. So in essence,
sugar, so I don't want to throw that off.
What causes this
inflammation?
So what causes this conversion of tryptophan down this bad alley, so to speak, that produces these really bad guys for your brain, these bad chemicals, are things like inflammation. To be more specific, these are autoimmune inflammatory chemicals largely that are associated with this. Otherwise, other factors that are associated include pieces of bacteria, largely from the gastrointestinal tract. It's called lipopolysaccharide or subclinical endotoxemia. And in the research experiments, they just go into a rat's brain and they inject these pieces of bacteria called lipopolysaccharide into the rat brain, in the rat memory area, and they go and they look and see what happens. That's where some of these studies have started. But now the studies have crossed the line to human subjects where they're now seeing the same relationship that we see in the rat with these inflammatory bad guys. We're seeing it in human individuals. So in essence, how it ties in is that most autoimmune diseases, in our experience, you can go back and watch all of our videos, seem to have some correlation with the gut. Most autoimmune diseases, I'll say it that way, just to be technically specific. And when there's a gut relationship, typically there's either food antigens that we're finding that are absorbing in, or we have pieces of bacteria that are absorbing in at too high of a rate. That initiates the immune system to attack these things. They're called, doesn't matter what they're called, but the immune system is going to attack these pieces of bacteria. That creates systemic inflammation, which then goes into the brain. And we're finding that it sets into sequence all these vicious cycles that then lead to everything we're talking about, and tryptophan being sucked down the wrong alley biochemically. And as a result, your brain cells in your memory area of the brain, the hippocampus, they overexcite themselves. As a result, they can start to die and degenerate, in addition to everything going on with the high levels of cortisol already going on in the background because maybe you had childhood abuse and your amygdala was primed because of that, or just because of this relationship where the amygdala is dominant. And so now you're set into this. It's another vicious cycle where lots of times depressed patients can't get out of it and they're so reliant on the medications. It's because of these factors. So that's kind of the story. For any of you who want more details on it, on the kynurenine pathway, that's what it's called, and tryptophan metabolism, shoot, we drew it on the board. I should have one of the girls just take a picture of that way. We can maybe attach it to this. Or we can just email it to you. Just let us know and we'll get you that data. Yeah, so I think that's the story.
Is it?
Yeah. I would love to go into more detail. Maybe we will with other psychiatric disorders, because we've had requests to talk about schizophrenia. We've had requests to talk about bipolar. And this pathway is at the core of several of these disorders. Maybe we'll even do we're talking about doing like a PowerPoint presentation for several different disorders. Maybe we'll do one on this.
So is tryptophan metabolism at the core of the issue?
It really is, but I titled it that way because you more have to understand that autoimmunity and inflammation are at the core of driving tryptophan down the wrong pathway.
Yeah.
And that's at the core of the issue. For depression, we're finding this, it's one of the key issues for everything else I just outlined. Yeah. That's the story.
Okay.
Okay. So thank you for watching. Go to powerhealthtalk.com for those references. Again, send us your feedback. Probably best to send it through Facebook. We get a lot of requests, and I'm embarrassed to say sometimes it can take us 3-4 weeks to get a response back to someone if they have a question or they want a research article. That's not us being standoffish or anything of that nature. It's just that we have a busy practice and we're trying to take care of a lot of different things, including staying up on the research. So we'll try to get back to you. And if you want a picture of the kynurenine pathway, let us know, and we'll go from there. So thank you for watching.